The room went silent the moment I saw him drop to one knee, not in front of me, but in front of her. My fiancé. Proposing. On my birthday. The ring on her finger caught the light, and my breath stopped. I knew that diamond. I had designed it myself. The rooftop restaurant buzzed with excitement as strangers clapped and cheered. Waiters rushed over with champagne. Someone shouted congratulations. And there stood Michael Turner, the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning, now calling another woman the love of his life. My hands gripped my clutch so tightly my knuckles turned white. He hadn't seen me yet, standing frozen near the entrance. The surprise he'd promised for my special day wasn't for me at all. It was for her. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching my entire world collapse in real time while everyone around me celebrated. Michael finally noticed me. Our eyes locked across the crowded space, and for one terrible second, time stopped. Then he smiled, that easy, charming smile I'd fallen for 3 years ago, and turned back to her as if I were nobody. Just another customer in the restaurant. The woman in his arms, a stunning brunette in a designer dress, laughed and kissed him. Cameras flashed. People whistled. I felt invisible and exposed all at once. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I realized half the restaurant was now staring at me, the woman standing alone near the door, clearly out of place at someone else's celebration. A waiter approached with a smile. Would you like a table, miss? I shook my head, unable to speak. Turning on my heel, I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind me, I heard Michael's voice rise in laughter. The sound followed me all the way to the elevator. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. Sitting in the dim parking garage, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara streaked down my cheeks. My carefully styled hair looked messy. My birthday dress, the red one I'd bought specifically because Michael said red was his favorite color, suddenly felt like a costume. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to drive back upstairs and demand answers. Instead, I pressed my palms against the steering wheel and forced myself to breathe. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael, running late, birthday girl. Order without me. Sent 2 hours ago. He'd been planning this. He'd sent me to that restaurant knowing what I'd find. Or worse, he hadn't cared enough to think I might show up. Either way, the cruelty was breathtaking. I looked at my reflection again and whispered the words that would change everything. You chose the wrong woman to betray. My name is Camila Banks, and on my 32nd birthday, my fiancé proposed to another woman. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 1. I designed custom jewelry at my boutique in the city, pouring my heart into every piece. Michael worked in marketing, or at least that's what he told me. We met at a charity gala where I was showcasing a new collection. He complimented my designs, bought a bracelet for his mother, and asked for my number. 6 months later, he proposed with a ring I'd helped him design. You understand beauty, he'd said that night. You understand me. I believed him. I believed every word. I supported his startup dreams, introduced him to my investor contacts, gave him space when he said he needed to focus. When my sister Maya warned me that something felt off about him, I defended him. He's ambitious, I'd said. He's building something. Now, sitting in that parking garage, I realized what he'd been building, a life without me. The red flags had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late-night phone calls he'd taken in another room. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd started password protecting his laptop. It's client confidentiality, he'd explained when I asked. I'd nodded, trusting him. Last month, when I suggested we finally set a wedding date, he'd changed the subject. Let's wait until my company's more stable, he'd said. I thought he was being practical. Maya had been more direct during our last lunch together. He's always performing, Cammy, she'd said, watching me defend him again. Like he's playing a role. I'd gotten defensive, accused her of being cynical. We hadn't spoken since. Now, driving home through the dark city streets, her words echoed in my mind. Michael had been performing. Every kiss, every promise, every moment we'd shared, he'd been acting. And I'd been his most devoted audience, applauding even as he betrayed me. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my workstation in my apartment, surrounded by design sketches and tools, scrolling through my order archives. Something nagged at me about that ring. I'd seen it before, not just the style, but that exact piece. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up custom orders from the past 3 months. Then I found it. Order number 4739, placed 6 weeks ago under the name M. Harrison. The shipping address was a P.O. box I didn't recognize. The design specifications matched perfectly: princess-cut diamond, platinum band, intricate filigree on the sides. My design. My work. Michael had commissioned his proposal ring from my own shop, using a fake name. The audacity nearly made me laugh. He'd paid with a credit card I didn't know he had. I pulled up the receipt. The billing address led to an apartment in the expensive part of town, not the modest place he claimed to rent. How much of his life had been a lie? The next morning, I did what any modern woman would do: I investigated. The woman's face was burned into my memory, so finding her on social media took less than 10 minutes. Vanessa Harlow. 28 years old. Socialite. Influencer. Daughter of the Harlow family, who owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Her profile was public, filled with photos of expensive vacations, designer clothes, and jewelry. My jewelry. I recognized at least 4 pieces from my collections in her posts. One photo from 3 days ago showed her hand adorned with my custom bracelet. The caption read, "When he knows your taste perfectly." The comments gushed about her mysterious boyfriend's romantic gestures. I scrolled further back and found them together: Michael and Vanessa at galas, restaurants, charity events. Photos spanning 6 months. In some shots, he wore the watch I'd given him for his birthday. My stomach turned. She'd been wearing my designs while dating my fiancé. The universe had a twisted sense of irony. When I finally called my mother that afternoon, I regretted it immediately. A proposal? To someone else? She paused. Camila, maybe you were too focused on your work. Men need attention. The familiar criticism landed like it always did, reopening old wounds. Growing up, I'd never been quite enough for her. Not feminine enough, not social enough, too ambitious. She'd been thrilled when I got engaged, finally seeing me as successful in the ways that mattered to her. Now, in her mind, I'd failed again. This isn't about my work, Mom, I said quietly. Michael was living a double life. Still, she continued, you might want to think about what drove him away. I hung up before saying something I'd regret. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built with my own hands, I made a decision. I was done explaining myself. Done defending my choices. Done shrinking to make others comfortable. Michael had underestimated me. They all had. That was their mistake. The business betrayal cut deeper than the personal one. Digging through emails and old messages, I discovered the truth: Michael had been using me. The investors I'd introduced him to, the ones who'd helped fund his marketing startup, had shifted their loyalty to his company. Clients from my network had become his clients. He'd built his entire business on my connections, my reputation, my trust. One investor, Harold Chen, had the decency to call me after hearing about the proposal. I had no idea about his personal life, he said carefully. But Camila, you should know. Michael's been positioning his company as if he built those connections himself. My hands clenched around the phone. Thank you for telling me. There's more, Harold continued. He's been pitching a new venture. Says he has exclusive access to high-end jewelry contacts. He's been using your boutique's reputation. Michael hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd stolen my professional credibility, parasitically feeding off everything I'd built. The realization crystallized into something cold and sharp in my chest. That night, I broke. Not in the way people expected, no sobbing, no desperate texts, no public meltdowns. Instead, I sat on my living room floor with a bottle of champagne and threw the glass against the wall. It shattered beautifully, glittering across the hardwood. The sound was satisfying. Final. I stared at the pieces, catching the light like scattered diamonds. Then I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. I titled it Operation Closure. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was emotional, messy, reactive. This was about precision. About taking back control of my life and my story. I started making lists, Michael's business connections, the timeline of his lies, property records, financial trails. Maya had once joked that I should have been a detective instead of a designer. You notice everything, she'd said. She was right. I did notice everything. And now I was going to use that gift to dismantle the illusion Michael had created. Through a mutual contact, I learned about the wedding. Michael and Vanessa were planning something extravagant for 6 months from now. The venue, Elysian Hall, the most exclusive event space in the city. 3 stories of marble and crystal, overlooking the river, with a price tag that made most couples choose elsewhere. But Vanessa's family had money, and apparently, Michael had convinced them he did too. My contact sent me the details almost apologetically. I thought you should know, the message said. They're making it a society event. Guest list of 300. I stared at the information on my screen, something calculating stirring in my mind. Elysian Hall. I'd been there once for a gala, admired the architecture, the attention to detail. I'd even mentioned to Michael how beautiful it would be for a wedding. Too expensive for us, he'd said at the time. Apparently, just too expensive for me. Then I remembered something, a rumor I'd heard at a business mixer last month. Elysian Hall was struggling financially. The owners were looking to sell. I called my lawyer the next morning. Patricia had handled my business contracts for 5 years and never asked unnecessary questions. I need information about a property, I said. Elysian Hall downtown. Ownership structure, financial status, whether they'd consider a buyout offer. There was a brief pause. This is about the wedding, isn't it? I smiled despite myself. Am I that transparent? Only to people who know you, Patricia replied. Give me 48 hours. The information came back faster than expected. Elysian Hall was indeed in financial trouble. The original owners had overextended during renovations, and bookings hadn't recovered post-pandemic. They'd been quietly seeking investors for months. The property could be acquired, not cheaply, but definitely within reach of my investment portfolio. I'd been smart with money, investing proceeds from my boutique into real estate and stocks. My grandmother had left me a trust fund I'd barely touched. Combined, I had more than enough. How quickly could we close? I asked Patricia. If you're serious? 3 weeks, maybe less. I was serious. The purchase happened quietly. I used my investment firm, Banks Holdings LLC, to acquire a controlling stake in Elysian Hall. The paperwork moved through channels with the efficiency that money provides. The original owners, relieved to have a serious buyer, didn't ask too many questions about my intentions. They simply signed, accepted the wire transfer, and stepped away from their failing property. Just like that, with a signature and a transaction confirmation, the venue where Michael planned to marry Vanessa became mine. I owned the marble floors he'd walk across. The crystal chandeliers that would light their ceremony. The ballroom where they'd planned their reception. Every inch of the space now belonged to me. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't tell anyone except Patricia and my accountant. This needed to stay quiet. I instructed the venue manager to continue operations as normal. Don't mention the ownership change to anyone, I said. Maintain all existing bookings and contracts. Business as usual. She agreed, probably confused but professional enough not to ask. Walking through Elysian Hall for the first time as its owner felt surreal. The manager, Claudia, gave me a tour, explaining operations while staff prepared for that weekend's events. The Turner-Harlow wedding is one of our biggest bookings, she mentioned, pulling up details on her tablet. 6 months out, but they've been very involved in planning. I kept my face neutral. Tell me about their vision. Claudia launched into details, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, the custom menu. Vanessa had expensive taste. Michael had apparently told everyone he was covering half the costs, playing the generous fiancé. They seem very much in love, Claudia added with a smile. I returned the smile without warmth. I'm sure they do. Over the following weeks, I watched the planning continue. I reviewed contracts, approved vendor selections, observed as Michael and Vanessa came in for tastings and walkthroughs. They never knew I was watching. The building's security office became my private theater, watching their story unfold on camera feeds. Maya called me one evening, her voice careful. I heard what happened. At the restaurant. I'm so sorry, Cammy. The apology in her tone broke something in me. You were right, I said quietly. About everything. I should have listened. This isn't about being right, Maya replied. This is about you being hurt by someone you trusted. I told her about Elysian Hall. About the ownership, the plan forming in my mind. Maya was silent for a long moment. You're going to cancel their wedding? I'm considering my options. Cammy, she said slowly, you could destroy him. Publicly. And his reputation, his business, everything. Why wait? I looked out my apartment window at the city lights below. Because this isn't about ending him. It's about ending his story in my life. On my terms. Maya laughed, sharp and proud. There's the sister I know. We talked for hours that night, reconnecting over the bridge my pride had burned. She offered to help however I needed. I promised to consider it. Having Maya back felt like reclaiming another stolen piece of myself. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Elegant calligraphy spelled out, Michael Turner and Vanessa Harlow request your presence at their wedding celebration. The audacity took my breath away. They'd invited me. Perhaps it was Vanessa's doing, she probably didn't know who I was. Or maybe it was Michael's cruelty, one final twist of the knife. Either way, holding that invitation felt like holding evidence of his arrogance. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering. Elysian Hall. 6 months from the proposal. A spring evening ceremony. I walked to my desk and pulled out the response card. In careful handwriting, I marked, accepts with pleasure. Then I mailed it back. Let them think I was broken enough to witness their happiness. Let them think I was too weak to stay away. The truth would be so much sweeter for their assumptions. Michael thought he knew me, the accommodating girlfriend, the supportive partner, the woman who'd accepted his excuses. He'd never met the version of me he'd created through his betrayal. I bought a new dress for the occasion. Silver, elegant, understated. Standing in my boutique's back room, I studied my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, stronger somehow, carved from something harder than before. The heartbreak had refined me, burned away the parts that had been too soft, too trusting. You look powerful, Maya said from the doorway. She'd stopped by to see the dress, offering her opinion. That's because I am, I replied, surprised by the certainty in my voice. I wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that restaurant 6 months ago. That Camila had believed in fairy tales, in happy endings, in the goodness of people she loved. This Camila knew better. He took my birthday, I said softly, still watching my reflection. But he won't take my peace. Maya came to stand beside me. He already lost, Cammy. He just doesn't know it yet. She was right. The game was already over. Michael just hadn't realized he'd been playing against someone who knew all his moves. I ran into Michael at a charity gala 3 weeks before the wedding. The universe had a sense of humor. He stood near the bar, confident in an expensive suit, laughing with a group of investors. Some of them were people I'd introduced him to. When he saw me, his expression shifted, surprise, then something that looked almost like smugness. He excused himself from the group and walked over. "Camila," he said, that familiar charm sliding into place. "You look, well." I smiled politely, channeling every ounce of grace I possessed. "Thank you. You too. I heard you've been doing great things with the boutique," he continued, as if we were old friends catching up. "Business is good." "That's great." He paused, and I could see him deciding how far to push. "I hear you're coming to the wedding." "I'm glad. I want us to be mature about this." "Mature?" The word almost made me laugh. "Of course," I said smoothly. "I wouldn't miss it." "Your big day is coming up soon, isn't it?" His smile widened, arrogance blinding him completely. 2 weeks. Should be quite the event. The paperwork crossing my desk was routine until I saw the notification from Elysian Hall's accounting department. The Turner-Harlow wedding had an outstanding balance. Michael hadn't paid the final installment, a substantial amount covering catering, staff, and last-minute additions. Claudia had sent a polite reminder a week ago. No response. I picked up my phone and called her. "The Turner wedding payment, how long has it been overdue?" "Technically, it's due 3 days before the event," Claudia explained. "But we usually receive it earlier." I've called twice. Michael Turner keeps saying the wire transfer is processing. I leaned back in my chair, a plan crystallizing. Don't pursue it further. Let him think he has time. Are you sure? If payment doesn't arrive, I'll handle it personally, I interrupted. Just document every attempt to contact him. After hanging up, I reviewed the contract. The terms were clear. Full payment required 72 hours before the event, or the booking would be cancelled. Michael was cutting it close, probably stretched thin trying to maintain his wealthy facade. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about reading contracts carefully. The night before the wedding, I watched the rehearsal through security cameras. The venue had been transformed, spring flowers everywhere, white silk draping the walls, candles ready to be lit. Vanessa looked radiant in a designer gown, practicing her walk down the aisle. Michael stood at the altar setup, looking pleased with himself. The wedding party ran through their positions while a coordinator checked timing. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. Except for one detail. My phone buzzed with a notification from the venue's payment system. Final balance remains unpaid. Authorization required for event access. I pulled up the contract on my laptop, reviewing the terms one final time. Then I opened the document requiring my signature as owner. The header read, "Authorization to cancel event due to non-payment and contract violation." I clicked through the pages, reading every clause. Michael had violated multiple terms, not just payment, but also misrepresentation on the booking form. He'd listed a business address that didn't exist and provided financial guarantees he couldn't back up. I picked up my pen and signed, "Camila Banks, owner." Then I hit send. The next morning began with chaos I didn't witness directly, only heard about later through Claudia's frantic updates. Guests started arriving around 10 for the noon ceremony. Vanessa's bridesmaids posed for photos outside. Delivery trucks brought final floral arrangements. Then confusion rippled through the crowd. The doors were locked. Catering staff stood outside, unable to access the kitchen. The sound system wasn't working. Security guards politely but firmly turned away vendors trying to enter. Claudia stood near the entrance with a tablet, her face apologetic and professional, as the wedding coordinator demanded explanations. "I'm so sorry," Claudia kept repeating. "The event has been terminated by ownership. All access has been revoked." Word spread quickly. Guests clustered on the steps, confused. Someone called Michael, who arrived within minutes, his face red with anger and panic. "What do you mean, terminated?" he shouted at Claudia. "We paid for this. We have a contract." "The final payment was never received," Claudia explained calmly. "And there were multiple contract violations. The new owner exercised their right to cancel." Michael's eyes narrowed. "New owner? Who?" I stepped out from the building's side entrance, walking calmly toward the commotion. I'd dressed carefully, a white tailored suit, my hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. The picture of composed control. Michael saw me first. His face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, then horror as understanding hit. "Looking for the owner?" I asked quietly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You're looking at her." The silence that followed felt like victory. Vanessa turned toward me, recognition dawning on her face. She'd seen me at the restaurant, the woman standing alone while they celebrated. Now that woman was standing between her and her wedding. "You?" Michael's voice cracked. "You can't, this is insane." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, the property deed with my name, the signed contract cancellation, documentation of his unpaid balance and false information. "You booked a venue you couldn't afford," I said calmly. "You provided fraudulent information on your application. And you failed to make final payment. The contract is void." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's phone was definitely recording. Security handed Michael the official termination notice. He stared at it, hands shaking, while Vanessa stood frozen beside him. Her mother, an elegant woman in an expensive dress, pushed forward. "This is outrageous. We'll sue you for everything you have." "Feel free," I replied evenly. "My lawyers will be happy to present evidence of fraud and breach of contract. Also, I'd be interested in showing the court how your daughter's fiancé has been living a double life for 3 years." I looked at Michael, letting him see the calm certainty in my eyes. "You built your business on my connections. You proposed with a ring I designed. You booked a venue you couldn't afford to impress her family. And you thought I'd just disappear quietly." The crowd had grown silent, everyone watching the scene unfold. I saw former business associates in the crowd, people who'd trusted Michael because they trusted me. Now they were seeing the truth. I turned to walk away, but Michael's voice stopped me. "I loved you," he said desperately. I looked back at him, and for the first time since the proposal, I felt nothing. "No," I said simply. "You used me. There's a difference." Then I walked away as chaos erupted behind me, shouting, crying, the sound of a carefully constructed life collapsing. The aftermath spread through social circles like wildfire. By evening, society blogs had picked up the story, high society wedding collapses hours before ceremony. Local news mentioned it briefly, focusing on the unusual nature of the cancellation. My phone exploded with messages, some sympathetic, some curious, some clearly fishing for gossip. The business community's response was more interesting. 3 investors who'd worked with Michael called to apologize for not seeing through him sooner. Several asked about my boutique's expansion plans, suddenly interested in supporting my actual work rather than his borrowed credibility. Vanessa disappeared from social media entirely, all her accounts going private or dark. The Harlow family released a brief statement about postponing wedding plans indefinitely. Michael's business started losing clients within days. Turns out people don't like being associated with public scandal and proven dishonesty. Harold called personally. "I should have told you sooner about what he was doing," he admitted. "I'm sorry." "You told me when it mattered," I replied. "That's enough." My boutique saw an unexpected surge in orders. Apparently, standing up for yourself was good for business. 6 months later, Elysian Hall glowed under new crystal chandeliers I'd installed. The entire venue had been renovated, fresh paint, updated technology, modernized amenities. Tonight, it hosted the bank's jewelry 10-year anniversary charity gala, celebrating a decade of my boutique's success. Guests filled the ballroom where Michael and Vanessa should have been married. Instead of their wedding photos, the walls displayed images of jewelry pieces I'd designed over the years. The event benefited a women's business initiative, supporting female entrepreneurs building their own dreams. I stood at the podium in a white evening gown, looking out at the crowd. Maya sat in the front row, beaming with pride. My mother had even come, though we were still working on our relationship. Patricia sat near the back, raising her glass in a subtle toast. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady and strong. "This venue holds special meaning for me. It represents reclaiming spaces that were meant to diminish us." I paused, meeting eyes in the crowd, women who'd supported me, clients who'd believed in my work, friends who'd stood by me. Someone once tried to take my birthday. But what he actually did was give me the gift of clarity. He showed me my own strength. Applause swelled through the ballroom, warm and genuine. Later, standing alone on the balcony overlooking the river, I thought about that night 6 months ago. The humiliation, the heartbreak, the moment I'd thought my world was ending. Instead, it had been a beginning. I'd taken the worst day of my life and transformed it into the foundation of something stronger. Michael had underestimated me. They all had. They'd seen someone soft, accommodating, easily dismissed. They'd missed the steel underneath. The woman who built a successful business from nothing. The woman who understood that real power comes from patience, planning, and knowing your worth. I pulled out my phone and deleted Michael's contact. I didn't need closure from him. I'd created my own. The venue he'd chosen to celebrate his new life had become the place I celebrated mine. Bigger, brighter, and completely on my terms. Standing in that beautiful ballroom, surrounded by people who valued me, I realized something important. He hadn't taken anything from me that I couldn't rebuild better. The birthday he ruined had become the empire I reclaimed. And that was the sweetest revenge of all, not destroying him, but thriving so completely that he became irrelevant to my story. Just another chapter in a book that was still being written. And this time I was holding the pen.